Okay, have you ever noticed how, when the world gets a little chaotic, things like astrology just seem to pop up everywhere? It's not your imagination. Today, we're going to get into the super interesting psychology of why our brains go there, to these kinds of systems when the hard facts just don't seem to cut it.
I mean, it's all over, right? On your phone, in conversations. It feels like astrology and other psychic services have just exploded. And yeah, it seems like a modern thing, but what it's really doing is tapping into something way, way older in us, especially when things feel politically or socially shaky. So just how big are we talking?
$2.3 billion. Yeah, that's the psychic services industry in 2024. This isn't just some niche hobby. It is a massive market. We're talking about roughly 3 out of every 10 adults in the US dipping into astrology, tarot, or something similar at least once a year. So the question isn't, is it real science? The real question is, what's the powerful psychological force that's going on here?
To really get it, we need to kind of shift how we're looking at pseudoscience. Let's just forget arguing about whether it's valid for a second. Instead, let's look at the job it's doing inside our heads.
This right here is the core of it. Science, that's all about what's empirical, what's testable. It needs proof, right? But pseudoscience, it's playing a totally different game. It's symbolic, it's metaphorical, and it's all about being emotionally satisfying. It doesn't really offer facts, it offers meaning.
Here's a great way to think about it. Pseudoscience works just like your brain's daydreaming mode. You know, when we're facing a gap in what we know, or the future feels totally up in the air, our brain's daydream engine just kicks on. It starts creating a story that makes sense, packaging all our fears and our hopes into a narrative that feels whole, even if there's zero hard evidence.
So how does this actually play out in our day-to-day lives? Well, for most of us, this daydreaming stuff acts as a kind of emotional anchor, helping us ride out the waves. I bet some of these feel pretty familiar, right? They're all about our deepest anxieties and hopes, the fear of getting left behind, the dream of a big win, the stress of a conflict. What pseudoscience does is give us a framework, like a horoscope reading, to process it all. It takes this messy, personal feeling and connects it to something bigger, something cosmic. It tells us our little struggles are part of a grand pattern, giving us a sense of continuity when life just feels random.
Okay, but here is where it gets really fascinating. It's not just regular folks like us who are using this kind of thinking. Leaders, people in power, they do it too, but for totally different reasons. And believe me, the stakes are much, much higher.
See the shift in scale? The anxieties aren't about missing a bus anymore. They're about a national disaster. The hopes aren't for a lottery ticket. They're for a place in the history books. For the powerful, this symbolic thinking isn't just for comfort. It's a tool. It's used to build a strategic narrative, to justify big decisions by saying they're aligned with some higher purpose or destiny.
Okay, so the themes are obviously different, but what about the mental machinery underneath it all? Is it the same? You know, we like to think our leaders are running on pure facts and data, but the research, well, it points to something a lot more complicated.
And this is where we get to the actual data, because researchers have actually modeled the ratio of these two modes of thinking, the fact-based one and that daydreamy symbolic one.
And the findings are all laid out right here. This shows us the estimated brain activity for both groups, split between that logical, scientific thinking and the symbolic daydream mode we've been talking about. And honestly, the numbers show a pretty wild contrast.
So, for an ordinary person, our brains are mostly running in this symbolic daydream mode. We're talking like 60 to 70% of the time. It's kind of our default setting for making sense of things, for creating those stories that get us through the day. The logical, fact-based stuff, it's a smaller piece of the pie.
Now, look at this. For governing persons, that whole ratio gets flipped on its head. Their thinking is dominated by the scientific, fact-based, strategic stuff up to 80%. But, and this is so important, that daydream mode never goes away. It's still a big chunk, 20 to 40%, and it's often hiding behind those big strategic choices, justifying them or filling in the blanks when the data just isn't there. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Look, this isn't about saying one way of thinking is good and the other is bad. It's about recognizing that we all have this fundamental human need to turn uncertainty into a story that has some meaning.
For most of us, this whole daydream engine is a source of hope, of resilience. It's a coping mechanism. But for people in power, that same impulse ends up shaping decisions that affect millions of lives. And when that symbolic story starts to override the actual facts, that can be a huge risk.
And that leads to this really powerful idea.
Pseudoscience isn't the opposite of science, it's more like its shadow. It's the brain's backup generator that kicks on to keep things running when the main power, the facts, goes out.
So, we all have this daydream engine. We all rely on it. The real question is, when the daydreams of the powerful become the stories that shape all of our lives, whose dream are we all living in?